It was the winter of 1912, and New York City was alive with restless energy. The streets pulsed with horse-drawn carriages battling for space with the new rumbling automobiles, while vendors shouted on corners and newspapers fluttered in the icy wind. At the heart of this chaos, inside the marble columns of a grand bank on Wall Street, worked a young clerk named Edward Whitmore. Edward was diligent, sharp, and ambitious. He dreamed of rising from his dusty desk to a corner office with a view of the Hudson. But for all his ambition, Edward was invisible to those above him. Day after day, he filed ledgers, balanced accounts, and wrote endless reports. His work was flawless, his hours long, but his presence went unnoticed. Supervisors passed by him as though he were a shadow. He could see promotions awarded to men less capable, less dedicated, but somehow more noticed. This stung Edward's pride. "Why do they never see me?" he muttered one night, staring at his ink-stained hands. He believed his problem was invisibility, when in truth it was something deeper. Edward's upbringing had been modest. His father was a tailor, his mother a schoolteacher. They had raised him with virtues of honesty and hard work, but they had also taught him to keep to himself, to mind his own business, and to avoid unnecessary chatter. Edward carried these lessons into adulthood, and though they made him respectable, they also made him cold in the eyes of others. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and never engaged with colleagues beyond what his work required. When others shared stories about their children, their hobbies, or their struggles, Edward kept silent, nodding stiffly before turning back to his papers. He believed that professionalism demanded distance, that success came from efficiency and brilliance alone. Yet what Edward didn't realize was that people are not drawn to efficiency. They are drawn to warmth. A ledger could not charm a superior, but a genuine connection could. And so Edward remained overlooked, a faceless cog in the great machinery of the bank. One afternoon, a bitter storm swept through the city. The wind howled between the skyscrapers, rattling windows and sending snowflakes swirling like a swarm of restless ghosts. The bank's employees hurried out, eager to catch the last trains home, but Edward stayed late, bent over his ledger. As he packed his papers, he noticed the janitor, an elderly man named Mr. Hensley, struggling to carry a heavy bucket up the marble stairs. For a moment, Edward almost ignored him. After all, he was a clerk, not a porter. But something inside him stirred. Perhaps it was the sight of the man's trembling hands, or the way the shadows of age deepened across his tired face. Edward set down his satchel and hurried forward. "Here, let me help," he said, taking the bucket. Mr. Hensley blinked in surprise, unused to such kindness. As they climbed together, the old man began to speak. He told Edward about his aching back, his years cleaning the bank, his pride in a son who had just joined the Navy. Edward listened, not out of politeness, but out of genuine curiosity, and for the first time he felt the warmth of connection. That simple exchange awakened something in Edward. He realized how little he knew of the people around him, men and women he had worked beside for years, but never truly seen. The next day he made a quiet vow. He would no longer confine himself to his ledgers. He would ask questions, listen, and learn. So he began with his closest deskmate, a clerk named Margaret, whose laughter often rang through the office, but whom Edward had barely acknowledged. "You always seem cheerful," he said one morning. "What's your secret?" Margaret smiled and told him about her love of painting, about the evenings she spent sketching in Central Park, capturing the beauty of trees and pigeons. Edward leaned in, asking questions about her favorite colors, her style, her inspirations. To his surprise, she lit up, speaking with a passion he had never noticed. By the time she finished, she was smiling at him with new warmth. For the first time, Edward felt not invisible, but welcomed. As weeks passed, Edward practiced this habit daily. He asked the teller about his newborn daughter, the cashier about his favorite baseball team, the secretary about her travels to Boston. Each time he listened intently, not feigning interest, but truly curious. He began to learn that the cashier's team had lost 3 games in a row, that the secretary longed to return to the ocean, that the teller's daughter had taken her first steps. Slowly, his colleagues began to seek him out, not because of his ledgers, but because of his listening ear. The office, once cold and mechanical, became alive with human connection. Edward felt lighter, more joyful, as if the weight of invisibility had lifted. He was no longer a shadow. He was a part of the human fabric of the bank.
The turning point came when Edward's supervisor, Mr. Callahan, a stern man with steel gray hair, entered the office one morning muttering about a broken watch. Most employees avoided him, afraid of his temper, but Edward approached cautiously. "Sir, may I ask, was it a family piece?" Callahan looked up, surprised. "Yes, it was my father's," he said gruffly. Edward leaned forward. "That must make it priceless to you. I can recommend a repair shop on Fulton Street. They fixed my father's pocket watch beautifully." Callahan's stern expression softened, just slightly. "Thank you," he said. Days later, when the watch was repaired, Callahan sought Edward out. "That was good advice," he admitted. "I appreciate it." It was a small moment, but for Edward it was everything. He had pierced the armor of a man no one dared approach, not with brilliance, but with genuine interest. Word began to spread about Edward's warmth. He was no longer the quiet clerk lost among papers, but the man who remembered birthdays, who asked about families, who listened when others spoke. His reputation rose without him realizing it. People mentioned his name in meetings, praised his attentiveness, and spoke of his kindness. When promotions were considered, Edward's name surfaced, not because of his ledgers, which remained flawless, but because he had become indispensable in another way. He had built bridges, softened hearts, and turned colleagues into allies. His work ethic had always been strong, but now it was paired with something greater: humanity. One spring morning, Edward was summoned to the corner office he had long dreamed of. Mr. Callahan sat behind a massive oak desk, tapping a cigar against a crystal ashtray. "Whitmore," he said, "we've been watching you. Your work is excellent, but more importantly, people respect you. They like you. That matters more than you think in this business. We need men who can lead, not just work." Edward's heart leapt. He had spent years striving for this moment, and yet it had come not through perfectionism, but through kindness. That day he was promoted to assistant manager, a role that set him on the path to the success he had always desired. Years later, Edward often looked back on his transformation. He realized that the moment everything changed was not when he mastered ledgers, nor when he worked late hours, but when he lifted a bucket for an old janitor and asked about his life. That moment opened the door to a truth that would guide him forever. People crave recognition, not for their achievements alone, but for their humanity. To be genuinely interested in others is to give them a gift rarer than money or status. It is to give them dignity. And so Edward's story lives as proof of Dale Carnegie's timeless principle: become genuinely interested in other people. It is not flattery, not manipulation, but sincere curiosity that unlocks doors. The world forgets ledgers, numbers, and reports, but it never forgets the warmth of someone who cared enough to ask, to listen, and to remember. Edward rose not because he demanded recognition, but because he gave it freely to others. And in that giving, he discovered the secret of leadership. Before people will follow you, they must feel that you have seen them.